everybody and welcome back to another brand new video where, apologies, it's a day later than planned, as of course it's not 15 years to the day since Boomtown aired, but it was 15 years and a day since it aired back in 2005. But yes, today I'm going to be looking back on episode 11 of series 1 of Doctor Who. It's Boomtown. So yes, this is, as I say, the 11th episode of the series, in many ways a kind of filler episode in between the big two-part story by Stephen Moffat of The Empty Child and the Doctor Dances, and the big two-part finale by RTD of Bad Wolf and Passing of the Ways. It needed an episode to go in between those two, and we ultimately ended up with Boomtown. Having looked into it a little bit, apparently the original plan was for a guy called Paul Abbott, who I believe was a sort of big, reasonably well-known writer back around that sort of time. He was originally going to write a story which very intriguingly focused around the idea that the Doctor created Rose to try and make the perfect companion. The story's going to be called The Void, but that's pretty much all we know about it. But it just sounds quite a bizarre and weird and also potentially interesting idea that they were going to run with, that the Doctor created Rose as a companion rather than her just joining the Doctor, which would have been really, really interesting, but surely would have massively changed what then happened in the finale and the whole future of the show from the Doctor and Rose's point of view. So yeah, that obviously is not what happened in the end, because he just didn't have the time or something to do it, I think was the main point of it. And so RTD stepped in to write an episode that was reasonably low budget, more character focused, of course, the story is, to be able to just plug that gap between the two big two-parters. And as a whole story, I must say I think it's pretty decent. Like, it's clearly not the greatest story the show's ever had, by any means, but it also is in no way a bad episode. I feel like it's got a lot of positive things to it. It's clearly more character-focused and driven throughout, which is kind of the nature of it when they're trying to save on budget, and therefore there's not a big set of alien race on another planet or some big explosions, although there's an element of that in the latter part of this story. It's clearly not a major thing because they didn't want to spend too much money. This story does, as we all know, pick up Margaret the Slitheen from episodes 4 and 5 of the series, Aliens of London and World War III. I believe it was basically just Russell really enjoyed her performance in the actress's performance of Annette Badland's performance in those episodes, and decided, why not, I'll write a story for her that brings her in and focuses on the consequences for the Doctor, really. This idea that's played out that the Doctor is basically going to be as giving her a death sentence by taking her back to her planet, and just looking at kind of exploring the fallout from that and how it would affect him and whether he could actually do it, and yeah, just giving a little sort of almost commentary on that idea, I think, which in some ways is where it kind of I think doesn't fall apart, but just kind of defeats that point at the end of the story, when actually the Doctor doesn't do anything to affect Margaret's fate. She is affected. She's trying to complete her plan, but then there's just opens the heart of the TARDIS and just gets turned into an egg, and it's all resolved, and the Doctor doesn't actually have to do anything. And so it kind of, as much as they've set up and sort of talked about and hinted at this sort of moral dilemma, and then we see sort of the exploration of the Doctor as well, and him sort of from the Time War knowing that he's killed all these people, and sort of you can just see the sort of slightly similar perspectives that come across at certain points in this story. But then ultimately he doesn't do anything, and she's just put back to an egg, and so the decision's taken out of the Doctor's hands. So I think that given that clearly the story is trying to focus on that, to then kind of just wipe it away and say it ultimately didn't matter at all, and the Doctor didn't have to do anything, I think is a little bit of a shame and kind of a slight letdown to end the story with. Clearly one of the other quite significant and interesting parts of the story is the relationship between Rose and Mickey, that's quite heavily explored in this episode in particular. Because of course at the beginning of this series, Rose very much just runs off with the Doctor and leaves Mickey behind, and then of course turns back up in episodes 4 and 5, but then again does just decide to leave again, and it sort of feels like we're finally getting the kind of fallout of that and how it's actually affected Mickey as a person. And it's a very reasonable sort of criticism, really, and I found myself very much siding with Mickey from his sort of point of view with this, that supposedly, I know we didn't really see the huge amount of it at the beginning of the series, but there's a couple of shots in there, and kind of the implication is that they were in a reasonably decent relationship before Rose met the Doctor, and then suddenly the Doctor turns up and Rose couldn't care less about Mickey. He's completely unimportant and doesn't matter, and so she just runs off, and that's it. And it just sort of shows that he clearly isn't the one that she loves anymore and the one that she cares that much about, and he feels so, and it just leaves Mickey feeling very like unimportant and like he doesn't matter, and would have been just very negative for his sort of self-esteem and feelings about himself, that Rose, supposedly the woman who loved him, has just completely run away and ignored her and doesn't care about him at all anymore. And so I just felt like it was really, really well explored in this story, showing in many ways the effect and the impacts of meeting the Doctor can have on your life and on the people around you. If you do run off with him, it can have quite serious consequences on a relationship, which is obviously up to this point in Doctor Who was never really explored at all in classic Who, because you just never really saw companions in relationships particularly. Sometimes they left for a relationship, like Jo Grant or Leela to an extent, but ultimately I think this is the first time it's so explicitly explored, and I just think it's a really, really effectively done. And it's just so notable at the end of this story as well, when we see Rose initially running around trying to find Mickey, but Mickey knows that she doesn't really care anymore, or feels that so strongly that she doesn't really care that much anymore, and so he just walks off, and Rose doesn't make any effort to try and find him. I guess she's just kind of accepted that she's messed up, and that it is all her fault, and that there's nothing she can really do now. So yeah, I just felt that was a very strong aspect of this story, was that exploration of their relationship and just how it's kind of completely gone, but also how Mickey is still in love with Rose, because he just turns up out of nowhere, even though he supposedly has a girlfriend, then wants to get a hotel room with Rose and all that sort of stuff. It just shows how it's completely messed up his head and things. And so I just thought it was a very, very fascinating, a very realistic and human portrayal of what this situation, the effect it would have on a relationship like that. It's great to see Captain Jack in this episode as kind of the companion. In many ways, it's kind of the only sort of standalone story, apart from obviously the previous one, where his introductory story, but it's only kind of the only standalone one-off story where Captain Jack is the companion, because we then have the big two-part finale where he leaves. Yes, he is obviously the companion of the story, but it's a finale, and it leaves to him leaving the TARDIS crew, mainly not really by his choice. But then he comes back for the end of Series 3, and of course that's all one big linked story, and then turns up in Series 4 for another big finale as well. So to kind of have a one-off standalone episode where he's a companion and part of it is quite nice to see, and quite a rarity for the show. Unless, of course, they decide to bring it back for Series 13. Please do it, Chris Chibnall. But for me as a whole, it just struck me as a surprisingly enjoyable story. I think given the lack of budget and time that was probably available for this story, and the fact it is squeezed in between these two big two-parters, I think it's a story that sometimes is probably overlooked, not necessarily forgotten, because particularly Series 1 is so, for Doctor Who fans, particularly from the time, is so ingrained into our minds. We kind of will always remember those episodes because it was such an iconic period for the show, I think. But it clearly is the kind of weak link of that set of episodes, really. And frankly, since The Long Game, it's kind of won the other kind of lesser good story, but it's still not bad by any means. And it, as I say, I think it is quite a good idea to bring Margaret back for this story. I feel like that she as a Slitheen does work reasonably well. We do very rarely actually see the full Slitheen costume, but I don't think that's a massive problem for this story, because it is just simply a more character-focused story, and that those sort of scenes with the Doctor and Margaret in the restaurant when they're talking about sort of killing people, and then they're trying to kind of occasionally you don't let somebody be killed because you want to try and be kind or convince yourself that it's okay, and just that exploration was fantastic and really, really interesting, and just felt so, for the Doctor, was so important and real and true for him as well, given what he'd done in the Time War. So I don't know, it just felt like those sort of moments were just really, really exciting and interesting, and seeing the sort of character of the Doctor explore that a little bit more in this story as well, I think. I must confess, one thing that I did notice, which maybe is just because I've become so kind of aware of it with particularly the Chris Chibnall era, is the propensity for expository dialogue, if I can get my words out, lots of exposition in this story, where it feels like because they can't really show stuff so much, there's a lot of exposition, kind of in particularly early on in the story. Part of it is just kind of what happened in the Aliens of London World War III two-parter. What is the rift? Let's explain all of that. Let's explain things that actually we've already seen and know, but because people might not remember, let's kind of do an info dump on it. And it just felt like points through the story, the stuff about kind of Raxacrotopalapatorius and the sort of sentencing of it, and then some of the planets that Rose has been to, and they just felt like a lot of kind of saying things that we're not actually going to see, but just kind of putting them in as very sort of waffly things into the script. I don't think it was terrible, and I don't think that generally Russell is particularly bad for expository dialogue, certainly compared to Chris Chibnall, but it just struck me a little bit in this story. I felt that because they clearly didn't have the time and money to be able to go further, that there are just a few kind of info dumpy type sections in this story, which don't make it worse, but just are noticeable, I think. But as a whole, this is a very, very solid Doctor Who story. It's nothing spectacular. It very much is a few interesting moments, a few interesting sort of exploration of character relationships and things like that, without ever being something particularly amazing. The plot is pretty bog standard of just Margaret wants to blow up the Earth and escape. That's all there is really to it. But that's fine, I think. For this sort of a story, it doesn't need to be anything spectacular because we've got a spectacular 2-part finale to come next. So yes, guys, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Please do let me know what you think of Boomtown down in the comments below. Whether you think it's actually quite a strong story that's rather forgotten about, or whether you think it's one of the weaker links of Series 1. I'd love to hear what you have to say down in the comments below. But next week, of course, I will be starting the 2-part finale with next Thursday. Hopefully, if I get it all in time, will be Bad Wolf, and then the following Thursday, Parting of the Ways. 2 great episodes to look forward to. But apart from that, guys, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Please remember to, as always, hit that like button, that's subscribing if you're new here, and I'll see you again very soon for a brand new one. Goodbye.